Right, now we've got business people here. We've got friends from the journalistic community. I'm going to be nice at the beginning of this campaign here as well. I'm going to take a mix of questions. I will take a couple of business people first of all. If there are questions from you, I'll take some of the journalists as well. Who would like to begin? And I'm going to throw the difficult questions to my colleagues on the platform. Yeah, there's a gentleman in the second row. We'll get you a microphone.
Philip Souter from Clifford Chance. I've got a question about the Europe aspect of all of this. You say that there will be no referendum unless there's a transfer of powers.
Yeah.
Now, that referendum could either be an in-out referendum or it could just be a normal referendum on the treaty itself. That's what the French did. That's what the Dutch did. If, as you rightly say, from a legal perspective, we benefit enormously of our membership in the EU, it's so important. Why have an in-out referendum as opposed to just a referendum on the treaty?
Okay, let me answer that directly, Philip. It's an important question. Look, we've said that if there is a transfer of powers from Britain to the European Union, then we would have a referendum. But we've levelled with people that that is unlikely. It's not the direction we want, after all, for Europe, because we don't want to see more powers transferring away from Britain to the European Union. I think in the event that that did happen, and it would require, obviously, the approval of the British government to think it was the right thing to do, then I think the right referendum to have would be to have that in-out referendum. But I've got to say, I've got to just be clear with you and indeed with the country, that's not our priority. It's not our priority, and we don't think it's likely to happen. And the reason I say this, and this is an important argument of this campaign, is that I think we've got to test out the argument, and we've been able to test out over the last 2 years, this question of who can more successfully reform the European Union. Look, the Prime Minister presented this proposition to us 2 years ago. If I threaten to leave, if I have one hand on the exit door, it's going to make my European allies much more likely to do what I say. Well, look, we've had an important test case of this. Jean-Claude Juncker. Right? The Prime Minister came along and he said, I'm not in favour of Jean-Claude Juncker becoming the President of the Commission. And now I'm going to gather lots of allies for my cause. Well, the opposite happened. The very fact of our Prime Minister supporting that cause drove people away, and he lost by 26 votes to 2. Now, he only had one ally for himself against Jean-Claude Juncker. He needs 27 allies to get the changes that he needs. This idea that the threat of exit is going to make reform more likely, it is just nonsense. It is just nonsense. And, you know, the way I put it to people is this. When David Cameron comes knocking on the door of Chancellor Merkel or President Hollande, they don't think he's coming to solve the problems of Britain or Europe. They think he's coming to solve the problems of the Conservative Party. But the problem is Chancellor Merkel wasn't elected to solve the problems of the Conservative Party, nor was President Hollande. So look, we know what the right strategy is in Europe, which is to build alliances, not burn alliances, and that's what a Labour government will do. Let's take another, looking for some gender balance. Maybe not, okay? Gentleman in the red tie. We'll take somebody with a red tie to provide a bit of balance.
Thank you. Patrick Bamford, Genworth. You talk about...
Where are you from, Patrick, sorry?
Genworth.
Great.
You talk about a long-term view, young people and apprenticeships. Can you give any certainty about the equity part of the Help to Buy scheme?
OK. That sounds like a question for one of my colleagues. Ed, do you want to say something about Help to Buy?
Yes. I think the new build part of Help to Buy has been extremely important, and that's something which we are absolutely clear will need to carry on through the next Parliament, because we need to support the new homes being built. On the second phase of Help to Buy, where I think there were some questions about the parameters, and the government made a number of changes to make them more sensible than their original plans, that's something that we will look at closely. It's not something which needs to become a permanent part of our housing market. We don't want to be in a position where long term we're using the government's balance sheet in this way, but it's something which we'll keep under review. The changes which the Chancellor has announced in the budget around supporting people to save for a deposit are things which we'll support and continue with. But fundamentally, the reason why people are locked out of the housing market and why rents have gone up is not about people's inability to save for a mortgage. It's fundamentally because house prices are so much higher than earnings, and that will only be solved if we build the homes we need, affordable homes where people want to live, protecting valuable greenfield countryside, but going back particularly to their mistaken dropping of the brownfield first policy, which was there before. And where Help to Buy helps us to build new homes, we'll carry on with it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. There's a lady in the second row. Yeah, also wearing red. Extra points.
Thank you very much. I'm Lopa Patel from Diversity UK. And the question I want to ask you, and I've asked you this before as well, but let's see if
I was beginning to remember that, actually. Yeah.
Yes. Now, we're saying we want to be very much part of the EU. We know that having a more diverse board brings greater stability and greater profitability for company and lower risk. So my question is this: the EU is proposing quotas for women on board. Where do we stand on that as a party?
Okay, I'm going to let Chuka say something about this. Let me just make a general point about this, because I think it's something that he will want to echo, which is that I think we do face a big challenge. And if I can say this to you, I don't know whether I said it to you last time I answered the question, but I think if I can put it this way, I think there's an issue about boards, and Chuka will say where we stand on that, because we do want to see progress. But I think there's an issue where it starts a lot earlier. One of the things that struck me in talking about education in the last few months is how we get more girls as well as boys into some of the subjects like engineering, science, and all of that. So I think there's actually got to take in relation to boards, but I think there's actually got to take much, much earlier as well, so that you don't have a gender divide in the kind of areas and subjects that girls and boys go into. But Chuka, do you want to add?
Sure, yes. I mean, the first thing to state is obviously in politics, we've also got to get our own house in order first. And I'm proud to sit in a shadow cabinet that is perhaps the most diverse shadow cabinet there has ever been. And Ed's been very clear that if we get into government, he's going to have a team that looks like modern Britain. And me, actually, he appointed the first black member of a British shadow cabinet. But in terms of business, with respect to gender and race and the other characteristics, I'd much rather that business got its own house in order first. I'm really proud that our Labour Lord, Mervyn Davies, has led the charge on more diversity on boards during the course of this Parliament. We've got to around 23% of FTSE 100 boards being made up of women. That's not the 25% that was sought. Now, it's good that we've had progress, particularly amongst non-executive directors, but we've got to see many more executive CEOs of boards who are both women and also from a BME background. With Tidjane Thiam stepping down from Prudential, we've now got, for example, no black CEOs in the FTSE 100. Now, if you want to do something about that, first of all, you've got to be able to see what's going on, and we need more transparency. Now, the government's introduced transparency measures which we support, so that all FTSE 100 companies have to disclose how many women they have on their boards, but also in their workforce more generally. I would like to do that on ethnic diversity too, and we're also going to ask, and Mervyn Davies, Lord Mervyn Davies, has agreed to do this, for him to do a similar review into ethnic diversity on Britain's boards, as he has already done, and in senior leadership positions in business already, as he's already done with respect to women. But we're clear, if we don't see the progress, we're not going to rule out more prescriptive measures, but that's something I'd prefer not to do.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chuka. Yep, there's a lady in the middle. I promise I'll come to the journalists in a bit, but we've got lots of business people who want to ask questions.
Thank you. Sophia Morel from the Young Fabians. Obviously, we're really thrilled to hear that there's going to be more opportunities for young people through apprenticeships. But what would you do to make sure that any rewards of the economic recovery are going to be distributed fairly across the generations?
Okay, Rachel, do you want to say something about that, both about young people and what more we're going to do in relation to young people and the wider issues that Sophia raises?
Yeah, hi, Sophia. There's a number of commitments we've made around young people. First of all, any young person who wants to go to university will face tuition fees now of just £6,000 a year rather than £9,000 a year. So more young people from all sorts of backgrounds can go to university and know that they won't start their working lives with such a pile of debt. But university isn't the route for everybody. And we've also said that all young people who have the skills and the qualifications should have the offer of a good quality apprenticeship that comes with high quality training, so that all young people, whether they want to go down the academic or more vocational route, have those opportunities. But also, when things don't work out and young people can't get jobs, it's really important that people can't go for year after year doing job application after job application and never get anywhere. So we're going to put a time limit on the period that anyone can spend out of work. And for people under the age of 25, that will be just 1 year. And after a year, our compulsory jobs guarantee will kick in. We will use a tax on bank bonuses to guarantee a job for every young person out of work for a year, so that the issues of short-term unemployment can't turn into long-term unemployment and then a lifetime of unemployment that today blights the lives of too many young people. So there's 3 distinct commitments for young people.
And I think that's right. And let me just add to that. Look, I think the key insight of our plan today and our approach on this is that, look, tax and benefit redistribution plays an important role. But the sort of mistake the left has made over a long period is not recognising that unless you change your economy at root, then you're not going to get the fairness of reward that you talk about. That's why plans for a high minimum wage, rewarding, giving tax incentives for the first time to a living wage, just for example, are really, really important. And in a way, there is a big choice. It does go to the big choice at this election, which is, you know, when I hear the Prime Minister speak, he wants to tell everybody that everything's fixed, everything's fine. Last Thursday, he was saying that the reason why more people were on 0-hours contracts was they were wildly popular and people wanted to be on them. I mean, I just don't think that's the reality of most people's lives. And I think the central issue that our country faces is this cost of living question, the cost of living crisis, because the cost of living crisis is about the separation between the growth in the economy and the wages of ordinary workers, and that's what we've got to change. Yep, I'd like some more business people. There's a gentleman over here. Yep, hi.
Thank you. Stephen Herring from the Institute of Directors Policy Unit. The Business Manifesto document understandably refers to those individuals paid more than £150,000 a year. My question concerns those who are paid less than twice median earnings, who, under the coalition government and its Labour predecessor, were dragged into the 40% tax band. Is there anything that you or your team would like to say about your attitudes to fiscal drag?
Okay. Do you want to say anything about our attitude to fiscal drag?
Well, there's a very good underlying point here, because as you know from the Institute of Directors, the average remuneration for a director is around half £150,000. People sometimes talk as though people who will pay the top rate of tax at 50p while we are reducing the deficit in the next parliament, that somehow that's business people. But as you know, the large majority of your members in the IOD aren't getting up to those salary levels. And if you look at people on middle and lower incomes, so this isn't only people on £10,000 and £20,000 a year, but 50, 60, 70, £80,000 a year, they're paying more tax, even with the rise in the personal allowance, because of what's happened to the loss of child benefit for people over £50,000, what's happened to the rise in VAT, which hits everybody, and also the restrictions on tax credits. And so people on all these income levels are in our mind. And what we want to do is to find a way in which we can balance the books in the next parliament and get the debt falling, but to do so in a way which is fair to people on middle and lower incomes who've paying quite a lot of tax already, as you are saying. Now, I can't come along today and start making detailed tax policy. That's for manifestos and for budgets. But we've already been clear, our plans add up without a rise in tax for people on middle and low incomes, and therefore we're going to be in our manifesto saying we will not need a rise in VAT, we won't be raising national insurance, and we will not be increasing the basic or the higher rate of income tax, which gets to your question. Now, I understand your point. You want me to kind of be detailed about the Rooker-Wise amendment and its application 30 years on. That's a level of budget detail beyond where it's sensible to go today. But I can say to you that people on the income levels you're talking about are very much in our mind when we talk about people on middle and lower incomes being hit by this government.
OK, thanks very much, Ed. Oh, there are lots of people want to ask questions. There's a gentleman in the second row. No, it wasn't you, actually, but sorry. No offence, it was the gentleman next to you.
Sherrod Cooper-Coles, chair of the Financial Inclusion Commission, which reported earlier this month. Ed, could you say something about what a new Labour government would do to promote financial inclusion, to build on the success of the last Labour government in promoting financial inclusion?
I think it's a really important issue. And look, one thing that I think that we've learnt on this is that, it is one of the great injustices of our country that the poorest people in our society pay the most for credit, and I'll get Caroline to say something about energy costs as well, pay the most for their energy as well. And look, part of the answer on this, and we set out plans to do this in relation to payday lending and credit unions, is to find other sources of credit for poorer people in our society. And credit unions have a big role to play in this. Personally, I also think there is greater work that needs to be done between the banks and credit unions, because at the moment you've got a situation where you've got basic bank accounts for people, which are quite limited, and frankly the banks aren't that enthusiastic about, and you've got credit unions which don't actually have proper access often to banking services. So I'd be interested in your view and that of others about how to make that interaction work better. But I think that credit unions are a big part of this. I think it's good the campaign of Stella Creasy and others has pushed the government on payday lenders and trying to deal with some of the injustice in payday lenders, but I think there is further to go. Caroline, do you want to say something about energy costs? Because obviously that's a big issue for the poorest people in our society.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right about the credit union's relationship with banks, because a lot of banks won't take on people, and there might be reasons for that, so we need to bridge between them to bring those people in, which is absolutely true. Now, I think, the issue around energy costs and I think fair bills, and I've always talked about fair bills when it comes to this. We know that the evidence is irrefutable that for some time now, some years, the big six energy companies have not treated their customer base fairly. And I'm talking about all those sticky customers, particularly that they inherited from privatisation. Now, it seems to me that if you are a good business, you want new business, but you treat your existing customers well. So our reforms are about making sure that we have the right regulatory framework to ensure that customer service drives us to fair bills. And that's important for those people who are in fuel poverty and vulnerable. But I have to say, it's also for people who can afford to pay the bill but don't want to be ripped off. That's why it's been such a one nation issue, I have to say, over the last 4 to 5 years. But beyond that as well, it's about making that sector more competitive. So on the retail side of energy in particular, we can open up that market through some of our reforms to make them hungry for the businesses they have, but also for businesses that they want to acquire. And within that, we can make sure that smaller maybe, but much more driven retailers can get a fairer share of that market going forward. And this is about, as I say, it's about fair bills. And when it comes to energy, as you will know, this isn't something maybe people can just choose between having. Everybody needs energy. It's essential to life. And I think government has a role to make sure that the framework for that is competitive, transparent, but fair.
OK. Lots of people want to ask questions. The gentleman, yeah, I think you know who you are.
Thank you very much. My name's Ian Collier. I'm an actuary, but I run a couple of businesses in the care, one for elderly people, but also a children's day nursery. We are blessed by having a large number of people on our books who are immigrants, mainly from Eastern Europe, who have joined the ranks of the British and come to this country over the last number of years, partly because they can do because of the membership of the EU. Now, I see these people as adding to the welfare and the economy, And there are others, however, who take the view that they're stopping British people getting British jobs. Now, you're a son of an immigrant, I'm a grandson of an immigrant. What's your take on all that, please?
My take, and I'll bring in Douglas to talk about the wider European issue, but let me answer you directly. Look, I think immigration has benefited our country and can benefit our country, but we've got to have proper controls. And look, these two things go together, in my view. And they go together in the following way. So entitlements must be earned, and I think we can probably agree on that. So we say people should contribute before they claim benefits. So, for example, we're saying that for at least the first 2 years when people come here, they won't be able to claim benefits. But there's also something which goes directly to your point, and in a way, I think it doesn't apply to your business and applies to a minority of businesses, but I think it's really at issue here, which is that migrant labour can't become a way of exploitation happening to undercut wages and conditions. And I'm talking about, and I'm not talking about businesses like yours, but look, just to give you one fact on this, over the last 5 years, there have been 2 prosecutions for failure to pay the minimum wage. I've got to say to people in this room, and I'm not talking about businesses in this room, that doesn't reflect the reality of what is going on in our labour market. And the thing that makes people resentful is when they feel that migrant labour is being used, either not paying the minimum wage or 15 people being put in a room by so-called hotbedding by a rogue landlord, or jobs only being advertised overseas. So you've got to have the right controls in place, and you've got to have a situation where at least there is fair opportunity for people in this country. And that's the other part of what I would say. Just go to this point. The issue of remaining an outward-looking country and having proper opportunity for people in this country, they go together. You see, look, there are two big fundamental issues at stake in this election campaign. There is the issue of whether we're a country that works for most working people, and then going hand in hand with that, I think there's lots of business people who'd say, yeah, but there's a big issue about whether we're going to remain outward-looking to the world. Well, the two go absolutely together. Because it's countries that feel confident in themselves, that they work for most people, that are confident countries and outward-looking countries. And so when we talk about apprenticeships and opportunity for young people, that is absolutely a core part of our central mission, which is the country working for working people again, and it's a core part of a mission to remain outward-looking. And on that point, I'll bring in Douglas Alexander.
Thank you, Ed. Exactly as Ed suggests, there's really 3 ways that we need to deal with this issue. One is our own labour market, avoiding the undercutting and exploitation that Ed describes, and we've got specific proposals to address that. Secondly, the interaction of the benefit system and the labour market, and again, there are specific measures that we've recommended that we can address with that. But thirdly, there's also the matter of dealing with other European leaders to make sure that we have a common approach across Europe. And that's really where we diverge so profoundly from the present Conservative government. We've set ourselves a test in terms of the reform agenda that we're putting forward in Europe. Not just does this make Europe work better for Britain, but do we believe these reforms can actually be delivered by a reform-minded British government? Because there's no point in us making recommendations for reform that we know we couldn't get through the European Union and then simply fuels a sense of somehow Europe is beyond reform and fuels Euroscepticism. And in that sense, I would assure you that in the conversations that Ed has had with Chancellor Merkel, with other European leaders, there is a genuine capacity to build an alliance for reform around these kind of issues, around whether we have a longer transitional period from new members joining the European Union and their citizens being able to travel and work across the European Union, about the issue of benefits being passported across countries. I'm confident on the basis of the discussions we've had, even in opposition, ahead of the prospect of government, that there is an alliance for reform around this issue. We just need a British government that is committed to reform and not to exit.
OK, thanks very much. I'm going to take some media questions. I'm going to take Carl Dinnan from ITN.
Thank you. You've talked about the importance of investing in infrastructure today. Is there any limit to the amount of money you would be prepared to borrow to invest? And if there is a limit, would you care to share it with us?
We've got a clear plan, Carl, which is, and Ed Balls will say something more about it, to cut the deficit every year and have a surplus on the current budget and have the national debt falling. And those are very clear fiscal rules. And I'll hand Ed on to say something more about that.
Well, this is a business audience which understands the importance of our long-term commission to invest long-term in investment and the importance for businesses and for the public realm of getting that long-term infrastructure right. But we've said very clearly we're going to get the current budget not only into balance but into surplus in the next Parliament, more than covering day-to-day spending. We're going to get the national debt falling in the next Parliament. We're going to do that as soon as we can in the next Parliament. And because we will inherit a deficit which is going to be very large, there are no proposals in our manifesto which will involve any additional spending, current spending or investment spending, which would need to be covered by additional borrowing. Now, that is the same fiscal objective, to get the current budget into surplus, to more than cover day-to-day spending, than George Osborne, the Chancellor, has had in this Parliament. Clearly, he's not managed to balance the books in the way he promised in this Parliament. He's now set a different objective for the next Parliament, not only to cover day-to-day spending, but to get the overall budget into surplus. That goes beyond what's needed to get the national debt falling. In my view, it's rather an extreme objective. That is why he has signed up to spending cuts in the next Parliament, which will be deeper in the next 3 years than in the last 5. I think the implications of that for infrastructure investment, for spending on skills, for policing and defence are very severe indeed. In our view, that alongside a commitment to unfunded tax cuts mean the Conservatives will end up cutting the National Health Service and raising VAT in the next Parliament. So that's the choice. Do you have an objective from the Conservatives which goes beyond balancing the books and will end up leading to tax rises on ordinary people, or do you have Labour's sensible, balanced plan to get the current budget into surplus, the national debt falling, and to do so in a way which allows us at the same time to continue to support businesses with their needs and to keep investing in education and our National Health Service? And I think the sensible thing is a balanced plan, not an extreme plan, and that's what we've set out.
I think the other point I would add to that, which I think is important, is that, as I always say on these occasions about the Conservatives, they can make the spending cuts, but they won't cut the deficit as they promised. And what's my evidence for that? This Parliament. Because after all, they made the spending cuts, they said they would eliminate the deficit, and they didn't. Now why? As Ed Balls always says, it's because of the third piece of this, which is raising living standards. Because if you don't raise people's living standards, you don't get the tax revenues coming in, and you don't get the deficit down as you promised. I'm going to take Lucy Manning now from the BBC, I believe.
Lucy Manning from BBC News. It seems that some of the companies that you quoted in your advert this morning are not happy about being used. Siemens saying that they didn't give permission and that you've overstepped the mark. Kellogg's and Nomura unhappy too. What's your response to that? I mean, these aren't Labour supporting businesses, are they?
No, we're simply quoting public statements by these businesses about the place of Britain in the European Union. And I think that lots of businesses all around this country aren't necessarily going to be supporting Labour or the Conservatives, but they do have a very strong view about our place in the EU. And I think this is absolutely at stake in this general election. Are we going to be reforming the EU from the inside, or are we going to be threatening exit? And I think that is something that I think business people, and the vast majority of business people, would share Labour's position on. I'm going to take Andy Bell from Channel 5.
Thank you very much, Andy Bell, 5 News. Assem Alam, one of your biggest donors, has said he doesn't like the language you've been using about business. And isn't he onto something? Isn't what you've said over the last 4 years, it's led you to be depicted and given the impression that you are, in the end, someone who's fundamentally suspicious, wary of private enterprise and profit? And how can you turn that around in the few weeks that are left now?
Let me deal with both parts of that question. Look, on the first part of that question, I think the difference with the Labour Party is our donors will have particular views on things. We don't always do what our donors say. That's a difference from the Conservative Party. It's just a very different approach. But on the wider question, look, I think the country's got a big choice to make. And I am going to be absolutely clear with you and others about this choice. Look, there is a business as usual approach. David Cameron wants to take a business as usual approach to the future of this country. I think that is an incredibly risky course for this country. I think it's an incredibly risky course for working families in this country. I think it's an incredibly risky course for our place within the European Union and whether we remain an outward-looking country. Ours is not a business as usual approach, but it is a pro-business approach. Because if you want to reform the energy market, the area that Caroline has led on, that is going to benefit millions of businesses in this country who say, well, hang on a minute, the energy market isn't working for us. Now, it is true that some of the big 6 energy companies, or maybe the 6 of the big 6 energy companies, haven't liked always what we've said about reform, but that's sometimes what happens. If you take banking reform is essential for millions of businesses across our country. And I think the vast majority of businesses on those 2 issues, for example, recognise the case Labour is making. But Labour is also clear about this, that the route to success for the country and the route to success for a Labour government, more than ever, relies on cooperation between public and private sectors. Because look, as Ed Balls always reminds us, there isn't going to be money to spend if there's a Labour government. There will have to be reductions in spending. The route to social justice, the route to a fairer country, lies in business and government working together on the issues that I've set out, whether it's a future for young people, or our place in the European Union and reforming it, or infrastructure, or banking reform, or long-termism, or all of those issues that we face. I'm going to take another business... oh, go on, I'll take Gary Gibbon. From Channel 4 News. That's the business. Gary.
Thank you. Big corporate
Someone
player.
said barely, Gary. I think that's very unfair.
Yeah, right. It's all starting well, isn't it? I wanted to follow up from what Carl was asking, because the IFS light our paths as journalists, and you lean on their quotations sometimes as well. You did heavily after the autumn statement. They say quite categorically that you've left yourself the wriggle room. You're shaking your head and haven't even started. That you've left yourself the wriggle room, the way you've written the rules, for the deficit to be approaching 30 billion by the end of the next Parliament. Are you categorically saying they're wrong on that? And just one other quick one, which is again their figures. They say that the cuts that you've planned could be anything between half what the Tories are doing to 0. I mean, is that right? Is that credible?
Okay, let me. On the first one, Ed answered on the point. Just on the second point, I just want to make this point because I think it actually goes to the question that Andy Bell asked me and the answer that I gave. Look, I'm the first Labour leader in living memory, and some of my party won't be wildly enthusiastic about this, to go into an election saying that outside key protected areas, health and education, where we're going to invest, and international development, there are actually going to be reductions in spending. I don't think any Labour leader has set a clearer or more determined framework for getting the deficit down. And so, I'm going to be very, very clear with you, Gary. I'm going to be very clear with my party. I'm going to be very clear with others that is our plan. Our plan is to reduce spending outside those protected areas until the books are balanced. I'm going to take another business person. Yeah, gentleman in the front row. And then I think you get the last question, sir.
Mike Diath for HTA Design. I want to pick up actually on the housing question because we're a company of 150, mostly younger people who might aspire to own their own home but are unlikely to. And what's going to happen in the next Parliament to really get delivery going in the housing market?
Okay, well, let me answer that because that's a good place to end, Mike, and it is absolutely crucial. Look, we have, and I would urge you all to go and read it, it's excellent bedtime reading, the Lyons Report. Which is the kind of thing we read at bedtime. It is the most comprehensive plan for housing that we've had in a generation. It's a plan to build 200,000 homes a year by 2020. And look, let me just say some of the things that will make that happen. We are going to say to large developers that they can't simply sit on land year after year and we'll give councils use it or lose it powers. We're going to do something else. Planning permission is a massive problem in this country. We all know planning permission is a massive problem. Now, how are we going to address this? It's actually a very, very important idea, and it's been pioneered by both Hilary Benn and Emma Reynolds, who work on these issues for us. Local people so often feel they don't get a look in when it comes to planning permission. So planning permission will be granted, but the houses will go to somebody else. So we're going to give councils powers to set aside 50% of the housing for local people, not for out-of-town buy-to-let landlords. And it's an approach like that. And if you look at the Lyons Report, there is a comprehensive approach which actually sets out a plan to say we've got to build these homes. And if you're thinking about aspiration and the future of our country and the future of young people, this is absolutely central to how we're going to succeed as a country. I just want to say this finally in particular to the business people in the room. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for the work you have done with us over these past 4.5 years. We mean that absolutely genuinely because I was talking to Ed about this just before we came on. If you think about the work that we've done, the reviews we've done, whether it's John Armitt or George Cox or Mike Wright or all of the other work that is going on, it's been about Labour working with business to say, how do we confront the big challenges that our country faces? And look, the last thing I want to say is this, which is many of you are going to be sort of watching this election campaign over the next 5.5 weeks or so. Look, we want to say to you, in government, if we are in government, this dialogue continues. Day one of us being in government, this dialogue restarts. That doesn't mean it stops during the election campaign, but we've got some other things to do on the campaign trail. But we are absolutely serious about this dialogue because we know, and this is something that we've focused on over the last 4.5 years, we can only crack the problems the country faces by working together, public and private sector, government and business working together. So we look forward to that dialogue continuing, and we want to thank Bloomberg and all of you for being with us today. Thank you very much.